when you're looking at, say, Perth, Townsville, they've had some good growth already for a few years. You're thinking, well, they've run their course. If demand still exceeds supply, then we can expect prices to continue to grow. So all you should be doing is looking, right, don't try and predict how long the market is going to grow for. Just look at the imbalance between supply and demand. If there is an imbalance between supply and demand where demand exceeds supply, then you know the prices are going to go up in the future.
Hi everyone, I'm Damien.
And I'm Jeremy.
Welcome to our Suburb Data Podcast, where we cover everything from property investing to expert busting. If you're new here, we share our personal and professional experiences from over 20 years in the game. So you skip the mistakes we made and go straight to property investment success. And today, Jez, we're going to be Q&Aing.
Yeah, good opportunity to answer some questions.
Yeah, we had some good feedback last time, so we're going to focus on a couple questions. So let's jump into it. So first question from Quotes in Shorts. Great podcast, been following for a while. Quick question. It's always mentioned to check active listings for supply, but what I'm seeing recently is most of them are generated by builders with home and land packages. Where do I find the real data? And does the demand to supply ratio plus take all of this into account?
Okay, so a couple of things there. First thing that I think is alarming about that is that if you're seeing house and land packages, you're probably in the wrong spot. And the demand to supply ratio is just scoring markets for demand relative to supply. So it doesn't really care whether it's a house and land package market or an established market, but it's very easy research you can do. If you find a market that has a high DSR, just check Google Maps and see, is there a large tract of vacant land that can be developed into the future? If so, you need to avoid that at least 5 kilometres away, ideally 7 or 8. Another thing I noticed there is checking active listings for supply. So there are some suburbs that have a large number of houses, some suburbs that are quite small. If you're just looking at the count of properties for sale, like 6 may seem like a really small number, but if it's a very small suburb, 6 could be quite normal. 60 could be seem like a really large number, but for a really large suburb, it could be just normal. So it's the percentage of stock on market that you want to look at.
So that's the metric you want to be looking at, stock on market, because I guess you need to if you wanted to do it yourself, you would need to know what the active listings are for the suburb, and you'd also need to know the dwelling count.
That's right.
And I guess the active listing can be a little bit misleading because if you look in certain areas, let's say off the plan units or maybe land and house packages, they package these up. And are they actually shown as active, like a stock on market, even though the land hasn't registered and the house hasn't been built? How's that register in the data?
Well, yeah, they're just promoting an off-the-plan property. So it's an interesting circumstance. You can actually have a percentage of stock on market greater than 100%. Which is peculiar. Straight away, you're thinking, hang on
100%. What's the average in like 1%, 2%?
It's around 1%, yeah. But how can you have more properties for sale than there are properties? Well, it's when a property is for sale when it doesn't exist yet. So these greenfield estates where it's just farmland, so you might have a very small number of properties there, and then you get a developer subdivide all these blocks and they're selling all these properties off the plan. You can actually, in peculiar circumstances, get a percentage of stock on market that's greater than 100%.
So the real data I'd be looking for here is just check the stock on market number. You don't really need to look at the active listings, do you?
I don't think you do, because it can be misleading. If it's a small suburb or a large suburb, what you want is the percentage of stock on market.
And typically what you can do is, depending, like I'm trying to understand what type of research is Quotes in Short trying to do here. Like you're looking at a specific local government area, or maybe an SUA, and then you can sort of look at stock at market on all those suburbs and just see if there's any big outliers anywhere. Typically, you won't see it unless it's maybe on the border and there are a lot of land and house packages potentially. But I would just make sure that I stay away from that. What's the research? Stay away, 6 kilometres from any?
I think it's ideally 7.
7.
But 5 is probably good enough. But yeah, you want to steer clear of vacant land because it will be developed into the future. Supply is the enemy of capital growth, so you want to steer clear of those.
So the real data, stock on market percentage, and does a DSR take all of this into account? Yes. So you shouldn't be specifically looking at one metric. The DSR rolls everything up, or the DSR plus in particular rolls up more metrics than the basic.
Yeah. So it's all considered. You don't need to look at individual metrics. It's all wrapped up into an overall score of supply and demand. Yeah.
Next question, Eric Park, 1934. How would the upcoming Brisbane 2032 Olympics affect the Brisbane, Queensland property market?
Yeah, well, this is actually really difficult to answer because you don't get Olympics in Australia very frequently. If we'd seen dozens and dozens of these in the past, then we could analyse that historical data and see what impact it has. But there's so few cases, you can't really control for all the other variables that are taking place, and so it's really difficult to say. Another thing, 2032, I don't know. It seems just a long way off. I would just be planning on what's going to happen in the next few years, and then we'll have a better look at Brisbane, say around 2031. But I'm generally a believer in ignore infrastructure because there are so many developers that will be well aware of the Olympics. They will bank on this, and they will use it in their marketing. And whenever there's a small infrastructure project, it has virtually no impact on property. Whenever there's a big infrastructure project, it draws in a lot of developers. So you can actually get a circumstance where there's oversupply. Badgerys Creek Airport, $1 billion infrastructure project, so much vacant land there that I'd just steer clear. But it's a massive infrastructure project.
Yeah, I had someone mention that to me the other week about the Badgerys Creek, like looking at land in that area. It's going to go up. I heard it on the news. I said, forget about what you listen to. Do your own research, because they're just going to pump it up, aren't they? The news, the media. So it's just a matter of doing your research. Or I remember calling up a council a couple months back in Queensland, and they mentioned to me that a lot of buyers agents have been calling up, and the specific questions they're asking is there any infrastructure? Are there any shops going? Like they're focusing on those type of suburbs, which I found really interesting because they're not looking at data. It's just, I don't know why that would matter so much because you would get a ripple effect no matter where you buy. So if I'm buying, for example, in, let's say Melbourne as an example, like I'm not worried about that maybe specific suburb. Like as long as I'm in that sort of LGA, that's the key thing. For me, you're never going to find the perfect suburb, are you? No,
that's right. There is no such thing. And historically, infrastructure has been a poor indicator of future capital growth. And it's because it's either too small to influence or it's big enough to lure in developers.
Well, I fell for it years ago when I had my property in Queensland, and the sales agent, it's going to go up because the Commonwealth Games are there, or the Commonwealth Games, and I'm like, I believed it back then. I'm like, okay, the Commonwealth Games, that's it. But I had no idea about looking at data or looking at any sort of metrics because back then there weren't.
Yeah, that's right.
There was nothing to
and
look
I've been fooled by that as well. I picked a market where the research showed there was to be $90 billion of infrastructure projects that were planned for this area. And I bought there, and every developer and their cuz knew about this too, and they built so much additional supply that the market was completely oversupplied. Prices went backwards, not forwards.
Oversupply is always the challenge, but great question there. So, yeah, I guess to answer that, we don't really...
I don't know.
I wouldn't factor it in.
Don't factor it in.
But would you, like, let's say, like you do hear about, Brisbane's still a great place to invest because of Olympic Games, but it might be a buyer's agent firm that's placed in Brisbane, so it's in their best interest, isn't it?
Yeah, they'll look for anything that's pro-Brisbane, yeah. But I think Brisbane will still be a good place to invest, but for other reasons.
Well, I think long-term. So if you're taking a long-term view and you want to buy in Brisbane, like the stock market's tight, like people are going to move there. It's look, rent's sort of picking up close to Sydney now. I think Gold Coast is even, in certain areas, even surpassed suburbs in Sydney. But it's if you've got a long-term view, but it's more about, okay, well, if I want to buy an investment and try and get that capital gain as quick as possible, well, there's other markets that I'd be looking at. If I've got a, let's say $900,000 budget or 800, I wouldn't be looking in Brisbane.
Yeah.
That's me personally, though.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be using the Olympics as a draw card. I generally would be steering clear of the massive infrastructure projects.
All right. Next one is from Neo Baboom. Great episode, fellas. If this has been answered and later, so we can go past that, but it is a time-consuming. Where am I going here? Okay, but how does one gather this data for an example like you provided on previous examples? Maybe this is one I'm confused about. Is it time-consuming as actually search an address every day, or are there exports you can run or subscriptions to get access rows of data for analysis?
Wow.
I'm thinking this might be from our data.
Was this the days on market one?
Could be.
Yeah, because he's saying there, I assume, search an address every day. Okay, so back in order to calculate days on market, you watch the properties that come on the market that are freshly advertised for sale, and then you keep your eye on them until they eventually get sold, and that period of time is the days on market. Then you take the average of that or some other aggregate for the month or period of time, and then you know what the typical days on market is. Now, to do that manually,
check every day?
Countrywide would obviously be just simply impossible. So the suggestion here is it as time-consuming as actually search an address? Yeah, it's extremely time-consuming. This is nothing you can do yourself. You definitely need to rely on data providers to get something like days on market.
But again, look at the one sort of main metric. I think with the days on market, I would just be careful of a rising days on market potentially. But
what you want to do is have this metric, days on market, along with all the other metrics, percentage of stock on market, yield, vacancies, and ripple effect potential markets on blah, 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 blah. You want them all rolled up into a single algorithm. So you don't have to analyze each individually, and you can never analyze them as good as an algorithm does.
Because you can overcomplicate it. The more metrics and the more that you put in there, you can restrict certain potential suburbs and properties even.
Yeah.
Like when you get to that granular thing, I don't like that because of this, or I don't like it because, there's, stats from 5 years ago, crime rates or a low socioeconomic area.
Yeah. You can't really use the scratch approach from a single metric exceeding a particular threshold. Yeah.
All right. Next one from Kamal Thapa 4707. Hi, Jeremy. I read a comment from you that it's better to buy in a hot market rather than trying to buy undervalue elsewhere in the cooler suburbs. The biggest question I have is, how do we know how much growth the hot markets still have left? I love this one. This is a great question. For example, Townsville, Perth have already grown so much, so I'm unable to decide whether to buy there or look elsewhere. This is a brilliant question.
Yeah. And it comes up quite frequently, actually. So the problem is that there is no single growth period that we can say, here's how long property markets grow for. They grow for 2.5 years, and then that's it. They're all done and dusted. Instead, we have some markets that surge for 18 months and some markets that might prolong their growth for 5.5 years. So when you're looking at, Perth, Townsville, they've had some good growth already for a few years. You're thinking, well, they've run their course. If demand still exceeds supply, then we can expect prices to continue to grow. So all you should be doing is looking, right? Don't try and predict how long the market is going to grow for. Just look at the imbalance between supply and demand. If there is an imbalance between supply and demand where demand exceeds supply, then you know the prices are going to go up in the future. So the hotter the market is, the more demand exceeds supply, and that's the market you should be going into. And you shouldn't be worried too much about the sort of growth that's happened in the past. I'll admit that the more growth that has happened in the recent past past, the less likely you're going to see more growth into the future. But if demand still outweighs supply, you're still going to see more growth. So it is tricky, but I mean, here we are right now in towards the end of 2024, and I believe there's still plenty of growth left in Perth and Townsville.
And if you are taking a bit of a longer term view, you are still going to see some growth. But the way that I look at it is, okay, look at your circumstances and, what's your strategy? So let's say you've got a budget of, let's throw 700,000, or maybe you set your parameters up to let's say, 550 to 700, like the typical value. So you're looking in that sort of range. And then I go, okay, well, I'm looking at that range, and then how many suburbs are in Perth or Townsville or Melbourne, like what's at the top? And then I would target that state, for example. So I'm looking at what budget I've got to work with. Then I want to see how many suburbs are listed in, let's say, the top 50 or the top 30 or whatever the criteria pops out as. And that's what I would be focusing on. That's me personally. Or you could maybe, spread it out. You buy one in this example, you buy one in one suburb and then another one. But the challenge you've got there is you sort of go on 2-350s where are you better off just going that 700? So I guess it really depends because you might be up against a bit more competition or there's not much stock around at that 350 range.
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather be fully invested than underinvested because property, it's not like shares. You can just go, okay, great, buy stock and it transacts, where property is a bit more difficult, especially if you're going interstate.
Yeah, that example you gave, 700 splitting up into 2-350s, you're unlikely to find two $350,000 markets. And if you do, they might not be that attractive. Maybe a better example is if you've got a budget of $1 million, then you could pick two 500,000s.
Or one 600, one 400.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It just depends on how much time that you can commit to trying to buy a property because it does take up time.
Yeah. So I guess in answer to that question, if you were to target a cooler market, A, it's easy to get in, but B, you could be waiting for. So let's say Perth and Townsville only have 2 years of above average capital growth, like double-digit capital growth left in them, and you're aiming for 3, 4, 5 years. So you've come in late. But would you go to a cooler market where you could be sitting there for 2, 3, 4 years without any capital growth at all? Or would it be better to jump into Perth and Townsville and get the trailing end of good capital growth? I would definitely go for Perth and Townsville.
Well, there's definitely multiple markets you could look into. So when you look at your budgets, that's what you have to sort of hone in on. So you might have 3 different areas and then you might consider, okay, well, what's got the best DSR potentially? So I will look at it as, if I can avoid that massive run, I'd most probably be leaning towards investing in an area that's starting to find momentum.
Yeah, ideally, yeah.
Because the other ones have already had a big run. But then you could look at things like rent increases over the last 12 months. That might help too. So obviously these areas like Townsville and Perth are very favourable because of the yield. Yields draw a lot of investors, where I try and think a bit differently, thinking, okay, well, if I don't need that yield, where else would I go? Where else is that a higher probability of capital growth going to happen?
Yeah.
Great question. Okay, so what is your opinion of mixed use zones? So this is from Gary Huang 11. What's your opinion of mixed use zone properties? Is it a safe gateway into commercial?
Well, I don't know anything about commercial real estate, and mixed use is also something I don't know about. So I don't have an opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't most probably don't really have much to comment.
It could be. I'm not trying to dissuade interest in it. It's just something I can't comment on because I don't know.
Yeah, I have had clients back in the past where they would sort of look at commercial from that cash flow perspective, but we don't look at commercial data. So there are obviously some demand and supply risks there. You buy a commercial property, maybe you pay a premium for it brand new. The cash flows might be there, but you might not see capital growth like you would with residential property. But there are people who have done really well from commercial. I just don't. I don't really personally have a bias towards that commercial. I prefer residential just because it's what I know.
Yeah, that's right. I've spent a couple of decades becoming, forgive the arrogance, an expert in residential.
Whoa.
So to then switch to commercial, I think I would just consult with someone who's spent the last 2 decades becoming an expert at commercial.
What's
property.
the definition of expert, Jeremy?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think the one thing I'm always liked, and I've got a bias towards your approach, is you look at data. It's not like you just talk and you don't back anything up. You actually provide the numbers and you spend a lot of time of your own personal time coming up with facts.
Yeah, well, because I'm an investor, I just want to know what works. How do we cut through all the fluff and find out what works? So that's what led me to finding the facts, looking at data.
And I think if anyone, listens to our podcast and thinks, oh, I'm not sure about that, like send an email, podcast@suburbdata.com.au. We're not always right. It's just that we look at the data, we try and make a decision on that. There are things that we might miss, but...
and I think that's also a very healthy attitude to challenge and question everything. Yeah.
Next one, Tim Davis, 2591. Hi, I'm wondering if you could have an episode on the performance of the suburbs with the highest DSR scores over 1, 2, 3 year periods. If you look at the suburbs with the highest scores from 3 years ago and compare it to the rest of the market. Now, you've done analysis on this a while ago, and we are planning on doing an updated video.
Yeah, it's you can't just keep recording a video on this sort of stuff because every year you get more data, more results. But we do have something on our website, dsrdata.com.au, where there is some past performance. But it is admittedly out of date now, and we'd have to go to the trouble of re-recording it. But I think that's a good question because you want to see whether it works or not. So that's a fair question, but
at the moment,
we'll have something more than just a one-off video, I think.
And we don't want to rush it either. We want to make sure we get it right before we publish the information. So, conclusion, that's great. So, Q&A, I think it's good to sort of pile these up and talk about them.
Yeah, so if anyone else has got any questions, cut loose, let us know. Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, just leave a comment in the comments section or just send us an email, as I mentioned before. But, Jez, where can everyone go for more information?
If this has been helpful, let us know with a like. If you know someone else who could benefit from this, click on the share button. And if you want to be updated whenever we publish more, there's a subscribe.
Yeah, that's right. So, subscribe, like, share to the world. Thanks for tuning in and see you in our next episode. Bye for now.